If you've ever landed in a massive Asian metropolis like Tokyo, Taipei, or Seoul at 2 in the morning, you probably notice something immediately. You might be jet lagged, you might be hungry, and you might realize you forgot to pack a phone charger. In a lot of cities around the world, this is a very frustrating problem to have in the middle of the night. But here, you just walk downstairs, head to the corner, and walk into a brightly lit store. Within 5 minutes, you have a hot meal, a charger, and maybe you even paid a utility bill while you were at it. But these brightly lit boxes aren't just places to buy snacks anymore. Over the last few decades, they have slowly evolved into a fundamental layer of urban infrastructure. Hi, I'm Daniel, and you're watching Asian Money Map. On this channel, we try to humbly unpack the business models and economic realities that drive the Asian market. Today, we're looking at the convenience store. We'll explore how it transitioned from a simple retail concept into a vital public utility. And more importantly, we'll look at the very real challenges this business model is facing today. To really understand how we got here, we have to start by looking at a concept that was originally born in the United States, and why it had to be completely rewritten for the Asian market. A lot of people know that 7-Eleven started in America. Back in 1927, an employee of the Southland Ice Company in Dallas, Texas, realized that people needed everyday items like milk, bread, and eggs outside of regular grocery store hours. They started selling these basics from their ice docks. Eventually, they expanded their operating hours from 7 in the morning to 11 at night, which is where the famous name comes from. It was a solid business model, and it was perfectly designed for the American landscape. The United States was becoming a heavily car-centric society. The convenience store naturally attached itself to the gas station. It became a pit stop. You pull off the highway, fill up your tank, grab a soda or a hot dog, and you leave. It was an alternative to the supermarket, meant for people passing through. But when a Japanese retail executive named Toshifumi Suzuki brought the 7-Eleven franchise to Japan in 1974, he realized very quickly that the American blueprint was not going to work. When I first started looking into this, I assumed they just copied the business model and translated the signs. But the reality is much more complex. Japanese cities and later cities in Taiwan and South Korea were not built around massive highways and large personal cars. They were built around incredibly dense rail networks, narrow neighborhood streets, and heavy pedestrian foot traffic. The fundamental DNA of the store had to change. It couldn't just be a pit stop for drivers, it had to become an extension of the pedestrian's daily life. And that brings us to the first major factor of this evolution, the reality of urban density and real estate. If you look at the housing markets in cities like Tokyo, Seoul, or Hong Kong, real estate is expensive and square footage is very limited. A lot of urban apartments do not have the space for a massive double-door refrigerator or a walk-in pantry. So, the convenience store essentially evolved to act as an outsourced pantry for the neighborhood. From an analytical standpoint, this is a massive shift in consumer behavior. Instead of driving to a big-box supermarket once a week and storing bulk items in a garage freezer, urban residents tend to buy what they need for that specific day. You grab a coffee and a rice ball on the short walk to the subway station in the morning. And maybe you pick up a small portion of fresh vegetables and a cold beer on the walk back to your apartment at night. By shifting the burden of physical storage from the consumer's tiny apartment to the retailer, the store embeds itself into the daily routine. But this creates a very difficult operational problem. If thousands of people in a single, densely packed neighborhood are using a tiny 300-square-foot shop as their personal refrigerator, buying single-serving items multiple times a day, how do you prevent the shelves from being completely empty by lunch? This leads us to the supply chain. And I want to be objective here. What these companies built is highly impressive, but it's also a system that is currently under an immense amount of strain. In a traditional retail model, a store might receive a delivery from a large truck once every few days. But in Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, logistics had to be completely re-engineered. Deliveries don't happen weekly. Traditionally, they happen 3, 4, or sometimes even more times a day. To pull this off without clogging up city streets with dozens of different supplier trucks, the major chains developed combined distribution centers. Instead of a bakery truck, a beverage truck, and a frozen food truck all arriving separately, the goods are consolidated at a central hub. They use specially designed trucks with different temperature zones. One section for frozen goods, one for chilled items like sandwiches, and one for ambient items. This means one truck can efficiently restock the entire store in a single stop. But here is where we need to look at the facts and realize that this system isn't magic. It relies heavily on specific economic conditions. This hyper-efficient supply chain was built during a time when labor and delivery drivers were relatively abundant and cheap. Today, that reality is changing drastically. In Japan, they are currently facing what is widely called the 2024 logistics problem. New labor laws have capped the amount of overtime truck drivers can work in order to improve their working conditions. Because of this, and a generally aging population, there is a severe shortage of drivers. The major chains can no longer easily guarantee 4 deliveries a day. They are having to adapt, either by reducing delivery frequencies, testing larger trucks, or investing heavily in AI to predict exact inventory needs so they don't waste a single trip. So while the logistics are incredible, they are absolutely vulnerable to demographic shifts. Speaking of predicting inventory, that brings us to the data network. Long before big data was something every tech startup talked about, physical retail stores in Asia were pioneering consumer analytics. Back in 1982, Ito Yokado, the parent company of 7-Eleven Japan, introduced point-of-sale, or POS systems. For decades, when you walked up to the register to buy a drink, the cashier wouldn't just scan the barcode. They would discreetly press a button on the register categorizing your estimated age and gender. Over the years, this created an unimaginably large database of local consumer habits. The systems began tracking local events, school holidays, and most importantly, weather patterns. If the data showed that a sudden cold front was moving in, the distribution centers would automatically suggest adjusting the orders. The store managers could then swap out cold noodles for hot steamed buns, move umbrellas to the front door, and stock up on hot drinks before the temperature actually dropped. But my opinion on this is that data is only as good as the human managing it. The corporate headquarters can provide all the weather forecasts and data trends in the world, but the actual franchise owner, the person running the specific store, has to make the final call on what to order. It's a very delicate balance between corporate algorithms and local human intuition. When they get it right, the store feels perfectly tailored to your exact needs. When they get it wrong, they are left with unsold perishable food, which has historically been a significant financial burden that falls largely on the franchise owner, not the corporate headquarters. As these stores perfected their food and retail operations, they started looking for ways to generate more foot traffic. And this is where the convenience store transitioned from a simple shop into an offline super app. In the late 90s and early 2000s, e-commerce was starting to grow. But in a lot of Asian markets, there were unique friction points. In countries with massive apartment blocks, delivery drivers couldn't just leave a package on a front porch because front porches didn't exist. Furthermore, at that time, a significant portion of consumers either didn't have credit cards or didn't trust putting their card numbers into random websites. The convenience stores saw this gap and stepped in. They introduced services where you could order something online, have it shipped directly to your local convenience store, and pick it up whenever you wanted. In Japan, they pioneered what is known as konbini payment, where you could print out a barcode from an online store, walk down to the local Family Mart or Lawson, and hand the cashier physical cash to complete your online purchase. This essentially solved the final mile problem for digital commerce. But they didn't stop at e-commerce. They started integrating with municipal governments and utility companies. If you look at Taiwan today, the density of convenience stores is staggering, and their utility kiosks are incredibly advanced. You can walk into a store and use a digital terminal to pay your water bill, pay your parking tickets, buy train tickets, or purchase admission to a concert. You can drop off packages to be couriered across the country. In South Korea, you can send international mail from a convenience store. In Japan, you can use the multifunction printers to print out official government documents, like your residential certificate, simply by scanning your national ID card. From an economic perspective, what has happened here is fascinating. The government and the private sector essentially formed an unwritten partnership. The state was able to offload administrative burdens and reduce lines at municipal offices by utilizing the massive pre-existing footprint of private retail networks. It makes life incredibly convenient for the citizen, but we should also acknowledge the dependency it creates. When you tie tax payments, package logistics, and daily food consumption to a single retail network, that corporation gains an immense amount of soft power in society. They are no longer just businesses, they are critical infrastructure. And you see this infrastructural role most clearly during times of crisis. When a natural disaster happens, which is unfortunately common in regions prone to earthquakes, typhoons, and floods, these stores are heavily relied upon. Governments often have explicit agreements with the major convenience store chains regarding disaster relief, because these stores have localized, heavy-duty logistics networks. They are sometimes able to mobilize emergency supplies faster than traditional government relief efforts. They act as safe havens. They are brightly lit, monitored by cameras, and usually staffed at all hours, making them recognized community sanctuaries if someone needs help. However, this brings us to another very real modern challenge: the 24/7 operating model. For decades, being open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, was the unbreakable rule of the Asian convenience store. It was the foundation of their reliability. But in recent years, this has become a massive point of friction. A few years ago in Japan, there were highly publicized disputes between franchise owners and corporate headquarters. Franchisees were exhausted. With a shrinking labor pool, owners were finding it impossible to hire enough part-time staff to cover the overnight shifts. Some owners were working dangerously long hours themselves just to keep the doors open. And when they tried to close from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m., they faced severe penalties from corporate for breaking their contracts. This sparked a national conversation about the human cost of hyperconvenience. Are we demanding a level of service that is no longer sustainable? The reality is starting to shift. Today, both in Japan and South Korea, a growing number of convenience stores have quietly dropped the 24/7 requirement. If a store is in a quiet residential neighborhood with almost zero foot traffic at 3 in the morning, corporate is finally allowing them to close for a few hours. It's a necessary correction, proving that even the most optimized business models have to bow to demographic and economic realities. The final aspect that makes this entire ecosystem work is hyper-localization. While the branding on the outside of the stores might look identical, the inventory on the inside is incredibly specific to the neighborhood. Take South Korea, for example, which actually has the highest density of convenience stores per capita in the world. Chains like CU and GS25 have deeply analyzed modern Korean social trends. South Korea has seen a massive rise in single-person households and a culture known as Honbap, which means eating alone. The convenience stores completely adapted to this. They aren't just selling ingredients. They offer high-quality, single-serving meal kits, fresh lunchboxes, and they dedicate significant floor space to seating areas with microwaves and hot water dispensers. They essentially function as highly affordable, casual dining restaurants for students and young professionals who live alone. Meanwhile, a store located in a corporate office district will look entirely different. In the morning, the shelves are aggressively stocked with premium coffees, grab-and-go breakfasts, and energy drinks. By the time 5 p.m. rolls around, the staff has completely rearranged the displays to feature cheap beers, dinner options, and hangover relief drinks for the salarymen heading home. They act like chameleons. They read the exact demographic makeup of a 200-meter radius and mold their inventory to serve that specific microeconomy. When you step back and look at the whole picture, the evolution of the Asian convenience store is a masterclass in adaptation. It started as an American car culture import, but through necessity, it evolved to solve the unique friction points of dense urban living. It took the simple act of buying a drink and layered on e-commerce logistics, municipal bill payments, fresh food supply, and emergency sanctuary. But as we've seen, it's not a perfect utopia. It's a highly complex machine that requires constant fine-tuning. As populations age, as labor becomes more expensive, and as delivery logistics face new regulations, these companies are going to have to evolve all over again. They will likely lean heavier into automation, self-checkout, and AI, just to maintain the standard of living they've created. It completely changes how we should think about physical retail. It proves that survival isn't just about selling things. It's about becoming so deeply integrated into the daily friction of a city that the residents can't imagine how their neighborhood would function without you. I'd love to hear your take on this. When you look at the infrastructure we just talked about, whether it's the utility payment kiosks, the daily fresh food logistics, or the hyperlocal adaptations, which specific part of this model do you think would be the hardest to replicate in your own country, and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read through them, and the different perspectives from around the world are always really insightful. And if you want to keep mapping out the realities behind global business models and economic trends, consider hitting the subscribe button. It helps us keep making these deep dives. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most complex economic engines in a city are quietly operating right on the corner of your street. See you in the next one.